Oh, okay. Yay, it worked. Okay. So, hi guys. I need to figure out some stuff real quick, so just give me a minute. Okay. Okay. Cool. Oh, okay, that's too long. Okay. Take 2. Okay. Hi guys, so this is for Political Geography AP Human Unit 4. So I'm just gonna go in like order of our... Okay. I hope you guys can hear me. This is take 3 because of technical difficulties. And I hope this works. So this is AP Human Unit 4 Political Geography. And I'm sorry if there are technical difficulties because this is my first time doing this and it is really strange. But okay, bear with me. Okay, cool. It works. Okay, so political geography is the study of political organization of the earth, and it's like how space is organized, and it focuses on territoriality, boundaries, and political activity patterns, but it always changes over time because we always do separate things. And sorry, and then um, and then we do other things, or we learn other things such as, or we look at scale through individual choices such as voting versus local, national, international, and global issues. And that's basically it. And there are other notes in our notebook about the nuts and bolts of being human. And it basically talks about how us as humans, we like control over our life, and we have, and we have to, or we like to have a high position and importance and influence over others' thoughts. Okay, so that's that. So next we move on to territoriality. And yeah, okay. And the chat is live, so I'll try to check in once in a while. So if you guys want to say something, you can say it. I hope this is working. So territoriality is like the attachment to space and the feelings of belonging and identification. Because like when you think about it, when us in the US, we kind of feel like very connected and attached to the US, saying like, oh yeah, we're American. And there's the emotional side where it's like, oh, this is our area, this is our space. But then there's just the other side, the other point of view, where it's just like territory is very important in one's life. Okay. So for territory, it's seen as four things. It's finite because there's only so much land in this world. Going back to Unit 3, Ekimine, permanently inhabited parts of the earth. There's very few pieces of Ekimine, I guess you can say, left on the world because there's so many people. There's so much people on the world, so territory is finite, and it's part of a country's identification. And in part of our notes, we wrote that like to make what makes a country is that you need territory. It's also necessary for survival because a country does its best when it has access to certain things, and territory is an important part to that, and it is an extension of one's self. Okay. So some terminology that we had to learn. State as a lowercase s is a country, so an example would be the USA, the US, or Canada. A state with a capital S is an internal division within a country, and you can look at that like California or any state in the US. A nation is an ethnic or cultural group, and I wrote down Jews because you can say like the Jewish nation. And then a nation state, which is something we also learn later on, is a territory of a country that coincides with a national group. And a very good example of that is Japan. And I remember Mr. Perry saying if like an FRQ, you would talk about Japan because Japan is just as a very homogeneous society. Okay. So, a multinational state is a state with different ethnicities and a cultural group, and a very good example of that is the UK or the former USSR. And a part nation state is a single nation spread across many states, so you can say like the Arab nation, because they don't have like a designated country where they are dominant there like across different countries. And then a stateless nation is a nation that has no designated state, which is kind of like where they travel place to place. They don't really have a set home. And an example would be gypsies. So, what makes a country a country? When I think about this, I like to think of Sealand and what it has, because Sealand has like all these things, and it's very easy to determine. So, one, it has territory. Two, it has economic activity. It needs to have a permanent population. It has social engineering, and that kind of means where like you're okay. I'm sorry, you shouldn't use like the word as part of its definition, but as I explain it, it'll be like where you're socially engineering people to think a certain way. So like Mr. Perry used the example of education, because social engineering was happening like during class, where Mr. Perry is socially engineering us to think a certain way for AP Human, or just like any of our teachers are telling us to think a certain way for each class. So that's kind of what like social engineering is. It kind of keeps us off the streets, and it makes members of society. It needs to have a transportation system, any transportation system, and it has public services. So the government provides public services and police power. It needs to have sovereignty, sorry, and it needs to have external recognition. So that doesn't, these aren't really set rules, but this is what people have come to realize what makes a country a country. Okay. Okay, territory. So we all learned how that it refers to the structure of territories. Territorial morphology refers to the structure of territories and their respective differences in size, shapes, and location. So for territory size, bigger is usually seen as better because you have more territory, and you have a greater chance for raw materials and resources. And then, but available resources and raw materials are more dependent in a specific location. And sometimes bigger isn't always better. So I show that the former USSR was not a good piece of territory because a lot of their land was not available to use. Like it wasn't, they weren't able to maintain crops in this area or live in this area of land, which made or which showed how bigger is not always better. But showing how big is good is the USA, because like us, we have many resources and we have very good infrastructure. But then sometimes sometimes not smaller is better, but sometimes a small piece of territory is also good, which is Holland, because it was easy transportation and there are fewer borders to protect. So then we go to morphology, shapes. So there's compact, elongated, fragmented, prorupted, and perforated. I bombed this quiz, but then I got to memorizing. So a compact state is equidistant from the center, or like the borders is equidistant from the center. So example, that would be Hungary or Spain. Elongated is a very long and narrow piece of land, which is an example for that would be Chile. Fragmented piece would be a like they're discontinuous pieces of land, which is Indonesia. Prorupted is, so it's primarily compact, and except for an extending piece of territory, which is Thailand. And then perforated, a country that has another country within their territory. An example of that is Italy, because Vatican City is inside Italy. So then I have some pictures. This is a compact state. This is Spain. So you can see how it's relatively equidistant all around the border. This is Chile. This is an elongated state. This is Indonesia, because you see how they're not all connected to one another. Oh, sorry. This is a prorupted state. This is Thailand. So you see how it's mainly compact, except for this proruption, or this extending piece of land. And this is a perforated state, which is Italy. And if you can't see, Vatican City is right here. So yes, that's it. So to continue on, I don't know if you guys are like seeing this, but okay. So relative location, global core, and so there's like a core of the world, and then there's the periphery, and usually the global core is more developed and it becomes less developed along the periphery. And it's basically saying like the richer you are, the more important you are to the world, but since not all states can use their available resources, it shows how location is very important. And but some states without many resources are very successful, such as Japan, because of their proximity to the core makes them successful. Like Japan is very mountainous, but then and they don't have many resources other than like fish, but then they are still very, very, very successful, just because that they're very close to the core. And it just shows the importance of situation, like the importance of where your piece of territory is, and it shows how much power you will have, in a sense. So then next is enclave and exclave. So an enclave is, I like to think of it as in, because it's on but then in, and then exclave is X as in like it's not connected to it. So then the example Mr. Perry gave to us in class is that West Berlin is an enclave of East Germany, or in East Germany, sorry, that's a typo, and an exclave of West Germany. So West Berlin was owned in a sense by West Germany, but it was completely surrounded in East Germany, and I show that in this picture here. So that's Germany, and then that's West Berlin right there. So this is West Berlin, and then it was part of West Germany, but it wasn't connected to it. So West Berlin is an enclave in East Germany, but it was an exclave of West Germany because it wasn't connected to the other parts of West Germany. So like another example would be how Alaska is an exclave of the United States. And another part of it is landlocked states, and it's kind of very self-explanatory because it's a country that has no direct access to the sea. Okay. 5 people are watching, but I don't know who you are, and I don't know if you guys can see whatever I'm seeing. So I'm really sorry because my laptop is like really, really bad. And if you guys have questions, please ask. Okay. So here, or next we have our boundaries, and there are 3 purposes, which are inclusionary, which is to regulate and control people and the resources. Exclusionary is to control the flow of immigrants. And 3 is to reinforce spatial differentiation, which is like what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. And I put in the picture of the terminal because it was actually a really good movie. And she worked for the U.S. Border and Protection at the airport. So how boundaries are formed, there are 3 steps, the 3 Ds: the definition, delimitation, demarcation. So definition is when you're like sitting down between the 2 parties discussing where the borders are. Delimitation, a cartographer draws them on a map. 3, demarcation, the actual borders are marked. Yes. But not all borders are demarcated. Okay. So next, boundary issues. So one is economic, because you had to worry about maintenance, staffing, loss of cheap migrant labor, stuff like that. And then you also have the social and cultural issues, because there's tension between countries, like with this fence, this wall between 2 countries. It kind of creates an increase of nationalism, and there's xenophobia, because with this wall it kind of distinguishes, again, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. So there's just an increase in tension. And there's environmentalism, because it interrupts migrating species between the borders. Like now the said species can't go from one place to another as easily as it did before the boundary before the boundary was put up. Also, it is damage to natural habitats, and it's just a human modification of the set. Okay. Anyways, next are types of boundaries. So I'm going to teach you guys how I remember it. It's a little weird, but it's okay. So my acronym is just the PGCASSREI. It's not really an acronym, but like I remember as people get content and some snakes realize eternal intelligence. So, yeah. I'm not okay, nobody is saying anything, so I'm worried that you guys aren't seeing what I'm seeing. So, I'm really sorry if this isn't working out. So first is a physical/natural boundary, which is very self-explanatory because it's just a physical and natural boundary. An example would be the Rio Grande River. A geometric boundary is kind of like very straight. And an example would that be between the US and Canada. A consequent boundary is based off of cultural characteristics such as like religion or language. An example would be Northern Ireland versus Ireland because there's a very linguistic based boundary there. An antecedent boundary is before modern cultural landscape. So that would be like it was made before that. And example would be Malaysia and Indonesia because sorry. And then like it was set already, and then when the boundaries were enforced, then there were some disputes. And then subsequent boundary is created as present-day cultural landscape emerged. An example would that be China and Vietnam. Also, there's superimposed, which was forcibly created. An example would that be the division of New Guinea into Indonesia by the European colonizers. So a relict boundary is no longer functional. So the example for this would be such as the Berlin Wall or the North-South Vietnam, such like that. So next is the economic exclusive zones, which is ocean territory for South Pacific islands. I don't know how else to explain that because I'm also a little confused on this, but the way I interpreted it is it's just a zone that is specifically for the South Pacific Islands for economic reasons only. And then an internal boundary is within a state, often for administrative purposes. An example of that would be for like all the internal division of the 50 states in the US. Okay. Oops, sorry. So, types of boundary disputes. There is definitional, which focuses on language terms of boundary agreement. So it's usually peaceful, the way Mr. Perry described it. He said that usually it's kind of just you sit down, you go over the boundaries. So in Argentina/Chile, they agreed upon a boundary in 1881, but parts of the southern Andes had not been adequately explored yet. So like between the when the boundaries were set, they didn't know about the Andes Mountains. Like they didn't know of the resources and the raw materials there, so they had to discuss the boundaries in a definitional boundary dispute. So next is locational boundary disputes, which focuses on delimitation and demarcation issues. So sometimes they are like Asian and African colonies, they're defined internationally but not internally. And the third dispute is operational, and it focuses on the function of the boundary. So it would be where a boundary, should it be like open or closed? Should it be guarded? And there are always like different views between enforcement, such as like our boundary. Like I don't know if there are disputes but then the U.S. has the boundary between us and Mexico for immigration, and Mexico isn't doing anything about it. Like, if immigrants come over to the U.S., Mexico looks at it as like it's our problem, not theirs. So next is the allocational boundary dispute, which focuses on the resources. Like, there's no clear agreement on who gets what. Like, if there was a river in between two neighbors, they could fight over who gets what fish, I guess you could say. It just, yeah, that's basically it. Alright, so now we go to irredentism. So it's where a state wishes to incorporate territory outside their state boundaries due to ethnic and linguistic connections between states. So an example would be Nazis during World War II, because they wanted to expand their territory through Poland and Czechoslovakia. And I have a picture of the Falkland Islands because the UK/Argentina, I don't know how to explain it, but I'm pretty sure the UK thought that they should be a part of the Falkland Islands should be a part of the UK. Correct me if I'm wrong, because that's how I read it, but I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if this is working, but okay. So next we have the internal state setup. So usually there's a core area, and it's often the original nucleus of settlement. As you look at it, Washington, D.C. isn't like in the middle of the United States, but it's the middle of the original settlement of the 13 colonies. It's like relatively in the middle. So it's usually an easily defined area, and the cleavage model shows there are differences between a core area and periphery areas. Usually capital cities are in a core area, and it's usually a primate city, which is the largest, most dominant, or which is like the primate city is in a core area. So like New York is a primate area, or primate city, because it's very large. It's one of the most dense cities or New York City is one of the most densest in the U.S. So a core area is the most developed economic base, and as I said, it's New York, largest, densest population, New York, the most advanced. This is very like up in the air, like you can say like most advanced transportation systems or most advanced cultural centers, but you can also say again New York for this, because like when you look at things like Times Square. And then a core area may have or did have a rich resource base, but they often exploit resources, and it kind of leads to differences between rural and city areas. So like as I wrote down below, during our election, rural areas voted red because they wanted more like rights, and then cities voted for blue. So that's what I kind of meant by like core areas exploit resources. Okay. Oops. So here we have geopolitics now, definition and theories. So it's defined as a relationship between geography and political activity, and it refers to a state's foreign policy and international resources, and it highlights strategic significance of place and territory. So like when we go over the theories, it kind of talks about how this area is the most important area of land to take over or have power in a sense. But then the origins were the late 19th and early 20th century, so it kind of sprouted from there. And Friedrich Ratzel is the creator of the organic theory. He says that a state, or he to look at a state as a biological organism, and he was influenced by Darwin. So he says how like a state is living, it's always changing, it has need for nourishment or resources, and the power is related to size, and the state or the living organism, I guess you could say, is grows by eating or absorbing smaller pieces of territory. Yep. So I think theories now. Yes, theories. So the first is the world systems theory, which was created by Wallerstein, and it just says how there is a core area and there's a periphery, and how the world is an interlocked connection of states. In the present world order based on global capitalism, it started around 1450. So next we have the north/south divide, and that kind of said how the northern hemisphere has the power, where like the north colonized the south, in a sense, and yeah, it just says that the power and the wealth is in the north. So the next is the sea lane theory, which is created by Mahin, and it said how the sea has the power, and that's kind of easy to understand because so the sea has the power. So next is the Heartland theory, which is created by Mackinder. So this one stated that Eurasia is the mainland and has the power. So Mackinder believed that the sea power, age of the sea, ended, and it was very important to take over Eurasia because it's a centralized location for global domination. And yeah, because Eurasia was since it was very central, it has protection from naval power and invasions, and that's basically it. But the problem with that was that Mackinder overestimated the Eurasian interior. So and also the invention of airplanes, which leads into the rimland the rimland theory, which was created by Spikeman, and this just says how the rim of Eurasia has the power. The problem for that is that there's no clear domination, because since it's so spread out, there was no way to like collaborate on things. Then we go into the Seversky theory, because he believed that the sky has the power, and that would be, it was particularly like peaked between the US and the USSR during like the space race, because the sky's the limit. Okay. Next, these three theories, they're all similar to communism. So the domino theory states that if one state falls, the other will too. Like, so if the USSR fell, then those that believe in communism will fall as well. And then the containment theory tried to prevent Soviet influence. This was created by Kennan. Sorry, I didn't write that down. It just tried to stop Soviet influence against others. Then we have the Cohen theory, which is the collapse of the USSR, as it led to new localized conflicts, because the Cold War, it hid a lot of localized tension. Anyways, so the big geopolitical theory is that theories justify world conquest and colonialism by one single power, and this one single power is called a hegemon. I kind of like think it's like a Pokemon. Anyways, there's a growing role of economics in global power as well nowadays. So down here I have a picture of the domino theory, because like, so if one country falls, then the others will too. So here is also the north-south divide theory. Okay, now we move on to supranationalism. Okay. So it says that it's okay. Just kidding. Extreme health is back to orange. Okay. Anyways, so supranationalism is the association of three or more states for mutual benefits and shared goals. And the trade-off for that is that some individual state sovereignty for benefits of group membership. There's the one perspective of independence and separatism, like, oh yeah, this is us, and like it just like separates you from everyone else. And then the other point of view is where it's an interconnected world, and states cannot protect themselves on their own. So there's also a rise of global business. So supranationalism should be like encouraged. So like an example is the European Union or the United Nations. And here is a picture of the United Nations. There are a lot more notes in our notebook, but I thought it was fit to just go over the basics of it. But like, yeah, that's it. Okay. Now we go on to devolution. They are regions slash people within a state. They demand or gain political strength and power at the expense of the central government. So it would be also sometimes assisted by supranationalism because, like an example would be how the United Nations recognizes minorities and they support regionalism to a certain extent. Ethno-nationalism is like a us versus them kind of perspective, how groups see themselves as distinct, so they want more power, which leads to like kind of like an uprising in a sense. So there is an economic influence on devolution, and because you want more control, so then like if you are like on the poorer end of the spectrum, then you want more power, so you rebel. And it often occurs in margins of territory, and they are most devolution is domestic issues only. Most. So it's not always domestic issues only. Okay. That's the basic of devolution. It's just where people within a country want political strength and power, but then it's also when if they gain power, the central government loses power. So next we go on to the nation state. So it's where countries where ethnic, national, or ethnic and national group boundaries coincide, official state boundaries, and few actually exist today, but it's also very up in the air because you don't know, like, are there any real nation states there? Because it has to be like how you interpret it. Like, does it have to be perfectly homogeneous? Because if it's perfectly homogeneous, then there are technically no nation states. But then if you're very lenient, like 90% or like, excuse me, sorry, 80%, then like there are still some nation states. So nation state blends sovereignty and territoriality, and like it blends the authority over states' affairs and the feelings of attachment. And there are economic influences because exploration was competition among states, and the idea of democracy and sharing power kind of like beat down on the nation state concept, I guess you can say. Yeah, okay. So then there are unification and nationalization of populations. But then with the result of a nation state, there is clear definitions of a state territory. And as I said before, there are varying views of a nation. So it really depends on how you interpret it. But as Mr. Perry said, the best nation state that you can say is Japan. I think this is one of our last slides. Yeah, okay. So here we have federal and unitary states. Historically, the most power is concentrated in the hands of a centralized government like a monarchy or dictatory. Is that a real word? Dictator? I think I just spelled it wrong. Dictator. Yeah, I'm sorry, I spelled it wrong. A monarchy or a dictator. And it works best in countries with a small size. So in federal states, power is allocated to units of a local government. And today, most states have a federal government. When you look at the US, we have a federal government. There's a variation in taxation and available goods because services because the local government decides that too. And boundaries are continually redrawn because of population increase or decrease. So like if somebody moves from California to like I don't know Ohio, then the boundaries have to be redrawn because in the House of Representatives we had to see how many people represent California and Ohio now, with the increase in Ohio and the decrease in California. That was a hypothetical situation. Okay. So next we have gerrymandering. So if you don't remember, gerrymandering is the drawing different voting boundaries to favor one group or fragment power. It like kind of creates pockets of strength and weakness. So there's like the excess vote, which is concentrating votes in a few districts, and there's the wasted vote, which is diluting strength by spreading across several districts. There are historical voting patterns, such as the U.S. In the U.S. there's like the Southern shift, and they are very influenced by religious affairs, ethnicity, income / education levels, and much more. What? Oh, excuse me. That's basically it on the electoral info. And I'm pretty sure that... Oh, just kidding, I have extra vocab. So here we have frontier, which is a zone of separation not clearly owned by one group. There's a different definition in our textbook, and it says how it's between two countries specifically. I'm not sure if that's true, but I wouldn't say so, because like you can say like the west frontier in the US, and that's not like in between two countries specifically. So I would like trust the definition that Mr. Perry gave us. And then there's the buffer state, which is a weaker state in between two powerful states. An example of that would be, let me go look at my notes real quick. Nepal for China versus India, and Mongolia for Russia and China. So forward capital is a capital that is relocated, which is, for an example for that would be Brazil, because it changed from Rio to Brasilia, because Brazil kind of wanted to show how like they have power now and they can like fight on their own, and how they're just stronger in general. So a sanction is an economic punishment or like isolation, and oh okay, okay, yeah, that's what a sanction is, and that concludes the review for Unit 4, Political Geography, if you human. I'm sorry if this wasn't like the best. This is my first time, please forgive me, and I'm sorry for technical difficulties, because I'm not very technological smart either. But thank you for watching, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna, me and the other host is Sammy Hadar, and we're gonna, what's the word? Probably upload Unit 1 and Unit 2 for the comp next week. So thank you for watching again, and good luck studying on your MC and FRQ. Thanks. Bye.